My name is Sarah Matthews and I am 27 years old. They tell me I should be grateful for this place, that I should consider myself lucky to have such devoted family members watching over me. But as I sit here in this sterile white room, staring at the same four walls that have contained my existence for the past 18 months, I wonder if luck is really the word I would use. The irony is not lost on me that what began as their desperate attempt to keep me safe has become the very thing destroying me from the inside out. It started with my breakdown, or what they called my breakdown. I prefer to think of it as my awakening, though I suppose that depends entirely on your perspective. After losing my job at the marketing firm, after David left me for his secretary, after my mother's funeral where I stood alone because everyone else had moved on with their lives, something inside me simply snapped. Not in the violent, dramatic way you see in movies, but quietly, like a thread pulled too tight finally giving way. I stopped eating regularly, stopped answering my phone, stopped pretending that everything was fine when clearly nothing was. My sister Emma found me 3 days later, sitting on my kitchen floor surrounded by empty wine bottles and the contents of every drawer I had emptied in some futile search for meaning. She took one look at me and made the call that would change everything. The facility they brought me to was called Serenity Springs, a name so aggressively peaceful it made my teeth ache. Dr. Harrison, with his kind eyes and gentle voice, explained that I needed time to heal, time away from the stresses that had pushed me to the breaking point. Emma held my hand as he spoke, tears streaming down her face, promising that this was temporary, just until I got better. I wanted to tell her that I wasn't broken, just tired, so incredibly tired of fighting battles I could never win. But the look in her eyes, the fear mixed with love and desperation, kept me silent. The first month was actually pleasant. The grounds were beautiful, manicured gardens stretching as far as the eye could see, therapy sessions that felt more like conversations with a wise friend, group activities designed to slowly reintegrate us into something resembling normal life. I began to think that maybe they were right. Maybe I did need this structured environment to find my way back to myself. The other patients became my temporary family, each of us carrying our own invisible wounds, united in our shared journey toward whatever healing was supposed to look like. I started painting again, something I hadn't done since college, losing myself in colors and shapes that somehow expressed what words could not. My sister visited twice a week, always bringing news from the outside world, always asking when I thought I might be ready to come home. But somewhere around the third month, the dynamic began to shift in ways so subtle I almost didn't notice at first. Dr. Harrison started asking different questions, probing deeper into my relationships, my past, my family history with what he called concerning patterns. My medication was adjusted, then adjusted again, leaving me feeling foggy and disconnected from my own thoughts. When I mentioned that I was feeling ready to discuss discharge plans, he exchanged a meaningful look with Emma that I caught but pretended not to see. The visits from my sister became less frequent, and when she did come, she seemed nervous, avoiding eye contact, steering conversations away from anything related to my leaving. I began to suspect that something was happening behind the scenes, decisions being made about my life without my input. The beautiful garden started to feel less like a sanctuary and more like an elaborate cage, the locked doors I had initially understood as protective measures now seeming more like barriers keeping me trapped. Other patients who had seemed close to discharge suddenly disappeared without explanation, their rooms immediately filled by new arrivals who looked just as confused and vulnerable as I had felt upon my arrival. When I asked the staff about these departures, I was met with vague responses about different levels of care and individual treatment plans. The painting classes were discontinued due to budget cuts, the group therapy sessions became more clinical and less supportive, and slowly but surely, the place that had once felt like a haven began to reveal its true nature. The truth came out during what was supposed to be a routine family meeting. Emma sat across from me, her hands folded tightly in her lap, while Dr. Harrison explained that my case was more complex than initially thought. There were concerns about my ability to live independently, questions about my judgment and decision-making capacity, legal documents that had been filed for my own protection. The words washed over me like ice water as I realized what had happened. During those early weeks when I had been so grateful for their care and support, when I had signed papers I barely read because I trusted the people who loved me, I had unknowingly signed away my freedom. Emma had petitioned for guardianship, citing my mental instability and inability to care for myself, and the court had granted it based on Dr. Harrison's recommendations and my own behavior during those first dark weeks. I was no longer a patient working toward recovery. I was a ward of the state and my family, indefinitely committed to a life I had no control over. The room spun as the implications sank in. Every decision about my medical care, my living situation, my finances, even my daily activities, would now be made by Emma and a team of professionals who believed they knew what was best for me. When I tried to stand, to object, to demand answers about how this had happened without my knowledge, Dr. Harrison's voice took on a firmer tone, reminding me that agitation and denial were common symptoms of my condition. Emma reached for my hand, her own trembling, whispering apologies that felt hollow against the magnitude of what she had done. The days that followed that revelation blurred together in a haze of disbelief and rage. I demanded to speak with a lawyer, only to be told that as someone under guardianship, I had limited rights to legal representation without my guardian's approval. Emma, when she finally visited again, explained through tears that she had only wanted to protect me, that she couldn't bear the thought of finding me dead in that apartment, that she had acted out of love and fear. But love, I discovered, could be just as suffocating as hatred, perhaps more so because it came wrapped in good intentions and genuine concern. The other patients began to look different to me now, and I wondered how many of them were truly here voluntarily, how many had signed papers they didn't understand, how many families had made similar decisions wrapped in the language of care and protection. My therapist, a woman named Dr. Chin who had replaced Dr. Harrison after our family meeting, explained that acceptance was the first step toward genuine healing. She spoke about letting go of the need to control outcomes, about finding peace within whatever circumstances we found ourselves in. But acceptance felt like surrender, and I wasn't ready to surrender to a life chosen for me by people who, however well-intentioned, could never truly understand what I needed to be whole. The medication made it hard to think clearly, made my thoughts feel like they were moving through thick syrup, but in the moments of clarity between doses, I began to formulate a plan. The plan started small, with tiny acts of rebellion that no one noticed but meant everything to me. I stopped taking my evening medication, palming the pills and disposing of them later when the staff weren't watching. The fog in my mind began to clear, and with clarity came a renewed sense of purpose. I started paying attention to the facility's routines, the shift changes, the security protocols, the way certain staff members were more lenient than others. I befriended Janet, an older woman who worked in the kitchen and had grown fond of me during my months of compliant behavior. Through carefully casual conversations, I learned about the layout of areas I had never seen, the loading docks where deliveries arrived, the maintenance schedules that left certain doors unmonitored at predictable times. Knowledge became my currency, and I hoarded every piece of information like a miser collecting coins. During family visits, I played the role they expected of me, the recovering patient who was slowly learning to accept her limitations and find contentment within them. Emma seemed relieved by my apparent progress, and Dr. Chin noted in her reports that I was showing signs of what she called adaptive acceptance. But beneath the surface, I was mapping every inch of my prison and calculating the exact moment when I could break free. The irony was delicious. By acting like the compliant patient they wanted me to be, I was gaining the trust and freedom of movement I needed to escape the very system designed to contain me. The night I chose for my escape was perfect in its ordinariness. Rain drummed against the windows, providing cover for any sounds I might make, and the skeleton night staff was focused on a medical emergency in the East Wing. I had befriended a new patient named Marcus, a veteran struggling with PTSD, who had mentioned during group therapy that he had noticed a fire exit that seemed to be malfunctioned, its alarm disconnected during recent maintenance work. I waited until the 3 a.m. medication rounds were complete, then slipped out of my room using a technique I had learned from another patient who had attempted escape months earlier. The hallways were dimly lit, and I moved like a shadow, avoiding the security cameras whose positions I had memorized over weeks of observation. My heart pounded so loudly I was certain it would give me away, but the facility was quiet except for the distant sounds of the overnight staff dealing with their crisis. The fire exit was exactly where Marcus had said it would be, and the door opened silently into the rainy night. For the first time in 18 months, I breathed air that wasn't filtered through institutional systems, felt rain on my skin that wasn't controlled by someone else's schedule. The sensation was overwhelming, intoxicating, and for a moment I simply stood there in the parking lot, letting the reality of my freedom wash over me. But freedom, I quickly discovered, was more complicated than simply walking through an unlocked door. I had no money, no identification, no plan beyond getting away from the place that had held me captive under the guise of care. I walked through the night, staying off main roads, following a route I had studied on maps during my weeks of planning. The rain soaked through my institutional clothing, and my shoes, designed more for comfort than durability, began to fall apart on the rough pavement. But every step away from Serenity Springs felt like a victory, a reclamation of my right to choose my own direction even if I had no idea where I was going. By dawn, I had reached a small town about 15 miles from the facility, and I knew I had maybe a few more hours before my absence was discovered and the search began. I found a 24-hour diner and convinced the sympathetic waitress to let me use the phone, claiming I had been in a car accident and needed to call my family. Instead, I called my college roommate Lisa, who lived 3 states away and whom I hadn't spoken to since before my breakdown. Her voice was confused but warm when she heard mine, and when I explained my situation in carefully vague terms, she didn't hesitate to offer help. She would wire money to a Western Union location in the next town over, enough for me to buy clothes and a bus ticket to anywhere I wanted to go. The kindness of this near stranger brought tears to my eyes, reminding me that there was still goodness in the world outside the sterile walls of institutions. As I waited for the money transfer, sitting in that small-town diner drinking coffee and watching normal people live their normal lives, I felt simultaneously invisible and hypervisible, like an escaped convict trying to blend in with law-abiding citizens. The bus ride to Portland stretched across 2 days and 3 states, giving me time to think about what I was really doing and what it would mean for the people I had left behind. I had no doubt that Emma was frantic with worry, probably blaming herself for my disappearance, questioning every decision she had made that led to this moment. Part of me felt guilty for putting her through that anguish, but a larger part of me was still too angry to care about her feelings. She had stolen my freedom while telling herself she was saving my life, and now she would have to live with the consequences of that choice. Dr. Chin would certainly use my escape as evidence of my mental instability, proof that I was incapable of making rational decisions about my own welfare. The irony was bitter. The very act of asserting my autonomy would be interpreted as a symptom of my illness, justifying the system that had trapped me in the first place. But I couldn't let those considerations stop me from trying to build something resembling a real life. When I arrived in Portland, I used a portion of Lisa's money to rent a room in a boarding house that didn't ask too many questions about identification or references. The room was small and shabby, with a window that looked out onto an alley where stray cats fought over scraps of food, but it was mine in a way that nothing had been mine for almost 2 years. I could lock the door from the inside, could choose when to sleep and wake, could decide what to eat and when to eat it. These tiny freedoms felt monumental after so long without them. Finding work without proper identification proved nearly impossible, but desperation made me creative in ways I hadn't known I could be. I convinced a small bakery owner to let me work off the books, cleaning and doing prep work in exchange for cash payments and day-old pastries. The owner, a middle-aged woman named Rosa who had emigrated from El Salvador decades earlier, seemed to understand something about starting over without official documentation. She asked no questions about my past and paid me fairly for honest work, treating me with a dignity I had almost forgotten existed. The physical labor was exhausting but satisfying in ways that therapy and medication had never been. At the end of each day, my muscles ached from real exertion rather than the artificial fatigue of psychiatric drugs, and I slept the deep sleep of someone who had earned their rest through genuine effort. Slowly, carefully, I began to build relationships with other people who lived on the margins of society, people who understood that sometimes circumstances forced you to reinvent yourself without the benefit of official approval. There was Maria, who cleaned office buildings at night and sent money to her children in Mexico; James, a former teacher who had lost his career due to addiction and was slowly rebuilding his life one day at a time; and Susan, an older woman who had escaped an abusive marriage with nothing but the clothes on her back and had created a new identity from scratch. These people became my chosen family, united not by blood or obligation but by our shared understanding of what it meant to survive when the systems designed to help you had failed. For 6 months, I lived this underground existence, working at the bakery, sleeping in my tiny room, slowly healing from the trauma of institutionalization in ways that no therapy session ever could have achieved. I learned to trust my own judgment again, to make decisions about my life without second-guessing every choice, to believe that I was capable of taking care of myself despite what the experts had concluded. This city became my therapist, its rhythms and challenges teaching me resilience and self-reliance. I discovered that I was stronger than I had given myself credit for, more resourceful, more capable of adaptation. But the past has a way of catching up with you, no matter how far or fast you run from it. It started with a phone call to the bakery, someone asking Rosa if she had seen a woman matching my description. Rosa, loyal to the end, claimed she had never heard of anyone by that name, but her worried expression when she hung up told me everything I needed to know. They had found me, or were close to finding me, and it was only a matter of time before they came to take me back to the place I had worked so hard to escape. That night, I packed my few belongings and prepared to run again, but as I sat on the edge of my narrow bed, looking around the room that had been my sanctuary, I realized that I was tired of running. Running meant never building anything permanent, never forming deep connections, never allowing myself to be truly known by another person. Running meant living in constant fear of discovery, always looking over my shoulder, never able to fully invest in any relationship or opportunity. Instead of fleeing, I made a decision that surprised even me. I called Emma. Her voice when she answered was a mixture of relief, anger, and exhaustion that broke my heart despite everything that had happened between us. She had been searching for me for months, hiring private investigators, working with law enforcement, blaming herself for my disappearance. Through tears, she begged me to come home, to return to treatment, to let her take care of me the way she had always tried to do. But I had changed during my months of freedom, had discovered parts of myself that I never could have found while locked away in institutional safety. I explained to her that I wasn't the same broken person who had needed rescuing, that the experience of living independently had shown me that I was capable of taking care of myself. The conversation stretched for hours, both of us saying things we had needed to say for years, finally being honest about our fears and disappointments and love for each other. Emma admitted that she had acted out of her own trauma from finding me in that apartment, that she had been so terrified of losing me that she had convinced herself that controlling my life was the same as protecting it. I told her about the suffocation I had felt under guardianship, about the way being treated like a child who couldn't make her own decisions had nearly destroyed what was left of my self-worth. We both cried, we both apologized, and slowly, carefully, we began to discuss what reconciliation might look like if it didn't involve my return to institutional care. The legal process of regaining my autonomy took months and required lawyers I couldn't afford, paid for by Emma, who had finally understood that love sometimes means letting go of control. We had to prove to a court that I was capable of independent living, that my escape and subsequent survival demonstrated competency rather than instability. Dr. Chen testified that my refusal to accept guardianship was evidence of mental illness, but my new therapist, a woman named Dr. Rodriguez who specialized in trauma recovery, argued that my actions showed remarkable resilience and adaptive functioning. The judge, a woman in her 50s who had clearly dealt with many similar cases, listened to both sides with patience and wisdom. She visited me at the bakery, spoke with Rosa about my work performance, interviewed my new friends about my daily functioning and decision-making abilities. The process was invasive and humiliating, requiring me to prove my sanity to people who had never lived through what I had experienced, but it was also empowering because for the first time in years, I was fighting for my own freedom rather than having others fight over my fate. When the guardianship was finally dissolved, I felt a sense of victory that was tempered by the recognition of how much damage had been done, how much time had been lost, how many other people were still trapped in systems designed to help them. Emma and I began the slow process of rebuilding our relationship on terms that respected my autonomy while acknowledging her genuine love and concern. It wasn't easy, and there were setbacks and arguments, but we both committed to learning how to love each other without trying to control each other. I stayed in Portland, but not in hiding anymore. I rented a proper apartment, one with windows that looked out onto a garden where I could watch the seasons change. I enrolled in community college classes, discovering that my mind was sharper than it had been in years, no longer dulled by medications I didn't need. The bakery work had given me confidence in my abilities, and I found that I had a talent for business management that I had never explored before. Rosa, who had become like a mother to me, eventually offered me a partnership in expanding the bakery into a full restaurant. The work was challenging and rewarding in ways that made me understand what recovery actually meant, not returning to who I had been before, but becoming someone new, someone stronger and more authentic. I started dating again, cautiously at first, but eventually found someone who understood my history without being defined by it. Michael was a social worker who had seen the damage that institutional systems could do to vulnerable people, and he respected my independence while offering support when I needed it. Our relationship grew slowly, built on mutual respect and shared values rather than need or desperation. Emma visited regularly, and slowly our interactions began to feel more like those of sisters than guardian and ward. She was learning to ask for my opinion rather than making decisions for me, to trust my judgment even when she didn't agree with my choices. The process of forgiveness was ongoing, but it was real, rooted in our mutual recognition of how fear and love had become so entangled that we had almost destroyed each other trying to save each other. 3 years after my escape from Serenity Springs, I received an unexpected letter from Marcus, the veteran who had told me about the broken fire exit. He had been released and was living in a halfway house, working on his recovery and trying to reconnect with his estranged daughter. He thanked me for showing him that escape was possible, not just from physical places but from the mental prisons we create for ourselves when we accept others' definitions of our limitations. His letter reminded me that my story wasn't just about my own freedom, but about the responsibility that comes with breaking free from systems that harm people under the guise of helping them. I began volunteering with organizations that advocated for patient rights and guardianship reform, sharing my story with legislators and other survivors, working to ensure that what had happened to me would be less likely to happen to others. The work was emotionally challenging, requiring me to relive painful memories and confront the ongoing reality of institutional abuse, but it gave my experience meaning beyond my own survival. I testified before legislative committees about the need for stronger protections for people in psychiatric treatment, the importance of informed consent, the dangers of indefinite commitment based on family petitions rather than genuine danger to self or others. Some of the lawmakers listened with genuine concern, others seemed more interested in protecting institutions than patients, but slowly, incrementally, changes began to happen. Laws were passed requiring more rigorous review of guardianship cases, patients were given stronger rights to legal representation, and facilities faced increased oversight of their commitment procedures. Now, 5 years later, I run my own restaurant with Rosa, who has become the mother I needed after my own mother's death. Our little place serves the community we both love, employing people who need second chances, people who understand that recovery is not about returning to some imagined previous state of wellness but about building something entirely new from the pieces of who you used to be. Emma and I have Sunday dinners together most weeks, and our conversations have evolved from careful politeness to genuine intimacy. She has done her own therapeutic work around the trauma of almost losing me, learning to separate her needs from mine, to offer support without trying to control outcomes. Michael and I were married last spring in a small ceremony in the restaurant's garden, surrounded by the chosen family we had both created from the wreckage of our earlier lives. Dr. Rodriguez still sees me occasionally, not because I need constant therapeutic intervention but because sometimes it helps to process the ongoing work of healing with someone who understands the journey. I think often about the other patients I left behind at Serenity Springs, wondering how many of them ever found their way to real freedom, how many are still trapped in the endless cycle of institutionalization that masquerades as care. What they called safety became my prison, but breaking free from that prison taught me that safety isn't something others can provide for you. Real safety comes from trusting yourself, from knowing that you can survive whatever life brings, from building relationships based on respect rather than control. My story doesn't have a fairy tale ending, but it has something better, the quiet satisfaction of a life chosen rather than imposed, lived on my own terms even when those terms are imperfect, uncertain, and entirely my own responsibility.